Hello, welcome to Manivil. I wanted to clarify a bit more some thinking I've done around ethics, morality, and Hume's thought gap, and so on, regarding a foundational problem with ethics, in my opinion, um, which is, as I alluded to in my previous, it was the second follow up to my trolley problem video, where I talk about the inherent problems in the trolley problem and other aspects of ethics that can be sort of that should be taken care of in your thinking, in my opinion, to make sure that you're not doing shit you shouldn't be doing. And now I'm moralizing, right? That's a stupid way of putting it. But I mean it in the sense of good and clear thinking. And, I've always adhered to a rule, personal rule of mine, which is a good beginning is half the job, right? If you just sometimes when I work with stuff that I need to be creative and find some new way of doing things, I have to have sort of a hands-on experience of it. I get going, and then I revise it, and then I redo it, and then I revise it. The sort of iterative approach to being creative, you could say, right? Or artistic, or whatever, whatever aspect it might involve. But when it comes to philosophy, philosophy is the foundational thinking that is the ground floor of all your other thinking. Otherwise, why would you do philosophy if it's not foundational, right? And then can you set some rules for that thinking, some meta thinking or some meta philosophy that says I have to follow particular rules in order to do philosophy well or correctly? And what would those rules be, right? Now, you could maybe say to some extent that there's some logical structure to it, or there's some. I hesitate to call it logic because I feel that logic is rather an outgrowth of knowledge, which is way down the line, so to say, right? But it's a kind of in the broader sense of using the term logic, which is not a good way. So I don't like this idea. Oh, but in the broadest way, then okay, then it's more fluffy, right? I like things to be more precise. I'm lacking a term for a structure of thinking that is sort of meta thinking or meta philosophy, right? And I haven't done a lot of reading up on what people would consider meta philosophy. I might have my own ideas, but how would you philosophize about meta philosophy if you need meta philosophy to start philosophizing, right? It seems we get into one of these circular arguments again, or begging the question, or maybe a paradox, you could say. And I'm not sure how to do it, to be quite honest, right? But I do have a sense that one of those things that is that there is a difference between thinking or philosophizing and then presenting philosophy. Usually people think of philosophy as something that is presented, something that is told, something that is written in a book or something like that, right? Your thinking is either much more detailed or much more complicated or fluffy, or in various directions than your thinking when you present it, with where you try to be clear and strict and so on, right? But your description of your philosophy tries to condense it into the right structure so that it is digestible by somebody else, right? That's the best one can do if you want to transmit the idea of your philosophy to somebody else, right? Which also entails various aspects of the external world. And these kinds of things I have dealt with a lot during my deconstructions of Bernardo Castro and my own presentations of my philosophy or my ontology, right? So we'll leave that alone for now, right? So it comes back to, but the actual philosophy is your thinking. It is not what you present. Your presentation is just an attempt at describing your philosophy. That is not the philosophy. Philosophy is the thinking. I think that's important to point out, right? And I'm probably doing some circular reasoning here. I'm not sure, right? Hopefully not, but at least I'm trying to get something across. And if there's a fallacy here or there, let me know, right? Please give me a comment, and please give me a like. I'm approaching 300 listeners at this point, so it would be nice if you gave me a few more likes, if you like my videos, of course, right? Otherwise, I'm not sure why you are sticking around if you don't like what I'm doing, right? So give me some likes, please. Where was I? Yeah, it's about the thinking. At the end of the day, you should be able to sit alone on an island philosophizing, right? You don't have to talk to the crabs or the coconuts or whatever, right? Or, the polar bears or whatever is there on that deserted island, right? But you can still philosophize. But one thing you might not be interested in is ethics, right? Why would you? Because there's nobody else there, right? In order for you to be ethical or such, in my opinion, you have to be in agreement with somebody else, and that means that it has to be somebody else who can agree with you and could potentially adhere to a moral principle. Now, in order for you to adhere, you need to have your own principle, in my opinion. And you need to discuss with somebody else how your principles, if it's not the same principle, and if it's somebody who doesn't have a principle, I would be cautious about interacting in the first place. But, there might be sort of a force majeure scenario if you're alone or two people on the same island there, right? You might want to illuminate the other person, if you can, about your moral principle and then try to get to some agreement, right? But if you're alone, that you can philosophize all you want. You just might not be interested in ethics because there's nobody else to be in agreement with, right? Or make sure that that agreement enables you to avoid both of you being immoral towards each other. But would that be somebody, you're sitting there alone at that island, and somebody falls down in a parachute, and then you say, you over there, do this, do that, do this, do that. Or don't do this, don't do that, right? Would that be fair? Wouldn't the other guy say, fuck you, man, who do you think you are, man, right? And if he's sort of curious, he said, well, hey dude, right? How long have you been sitting here? What makes you able to boss me around like that? What if I'm bossing you around? I want to boss you around. If you can boss me around, then I can boss you around, right? I can tell you to shut the fuck up. Huh? Why not? I could claim all sorts of thoughts or philosophies or whatever, right? So it doesn't work. And from a very, very foundational point of view, as I'm trying to allude here using Hume, right? As I did in the previous video, that there is no connection between I have something going on in my head, now I can boss you around, right? What would that link be, right? And I'm trying to fit Hume into this, right? And not that I necessarily need, but I'm sort of reflecting on what Hume is saying. And if we take Hume's sort of a part of the quote from the treatise, the so-called is-ought gap, right? That where Hume says people talk like this. They say they establish something like the being of a god, or they make some kind of observation or refer to some observation for instance, concerning human affairs or whatever, right? And then he says, when of a sudden ought or ought not appear, right? They talk about, I think there is a God, and I think there is this elephant over there, and how, these people do this, and that person did that, and so on. And you ought not or ought, right? Which is bossing people around. It's sort of camouflaged in the words, you ought this, or you ought that. But it's basically an attempt, an appeal to, I'm going to boss you around now, right? I'm going to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. Now, maybe the deepest problem, or the actual deep, the basic problem, the actual basic problem in this isort is you don't get to tell people what they ought or ought not do. The problem is not that you have to find a way in the description of the world in a sort of meta-ethical fashion, find out, can you experience this and can you experience that, and therefore I get to say ought, right? No, the problem is, the isort problem is that there is no ought, right? As I say here, in general, the problem is not, as usually thought, to bridge the gap by pointing out how you can experience immorality, or pointing to some elusive bridge or whatever, something like that, right? There's something before the oughts that has to be fixed in order for me to get to say the oughts. Then I can just say oughts as much as I want, right? Who says that you can get to do some oughts? What is an ought, right? Isn't it, I'm going to tell you what to do? I mean, I can't... Yeah, you can always be fluffy about it. It's just an appeal to good thinking. Well, fuck off, right? Why do we have a government bossing people around or stealing their money, right? If they're not doing, ought or ought not on a large scale, right? On a completely ridiculously large armed scale. Who are those people who get to boss people around? Right? I don't get to boss people. I can go to somebody else and say, give me half of your money, and or I'll shoot you, something like that, right? Where do these oughts come from? Right? If you take it, in my opinion, as I see it now, there is no ought. You cannot get to an ought. That's the problem. There are no oughts. You don't get to boss anybody around. I don't get to boss anybody around, right? No matter what, as I say here, no matter what I'm experiencing, thinking or feeling or philosophizing, none of that of a sudden, to paraphrase Hume, gives me the right to boss anybody around. No matter what I'm fucking thinking, doesn't condense into a commandment. Right? There are no commandments. You don't get to boss people around. And soon as you start telling people what to do, you're the problem. So how do you approach that? Well, maybe you should stop telling people what to do, right? Shut the fuck up, man. Take care of yourself. Don't boss me around. Don't tell me what to do. And don't tell me you should have half of what I make or what I produce in order to fend off scare scenarios, right? Maybe there are no oughts. I would say it's not a maybe. Of course there are no oughts. Of course you don't get to boss me around just because you have done some thinking or whatever else is going on in your weird head, right? You don't get to boss anybody around. I don't get to boss anybody around. So what is the exception? So there's also always an exception, right? Well, if that guy falls down on my deserted island, it's no longer deserted, according to me. Now there's another inhabitor, right? Now, what if I say, I don't get to boss you around, right? So you don't get to boss me around either. But there's only one coconut. Well, how do we do that, right? Maybe it's about coming to an agreement. And first figure out, how do you approach each other without bossing you around into an agreement? If I say to you, do you want to get to an agreement? Right? Am I bossing you around? I'm inquiring, right? There might be a sort of a fluffy boundary where you could say, you sound like you are bossing me around by asking me this question. But, okay, fine, if you don't want to, right? The alternative might be much worse than not engaging in an agreement, potentially at least, right? And then we sort of talk to each other, right? Sit down, that guy sits over there, or woman, if that's the case, right? Or the person. And say, okay, I want that coconut, you want that coconut, well, okay, you don't want that coconut, okay, I'll take the coconut, right? Then an agreement, right? But if we both want the coconut, how do we go about doing that, right? Then we are not bossing somebody else around. We are telling somebody else that might have the same incentives that I have. Or I'm telling somebody else who has the same incentive potentially as I have. That we are going to do it together. Or something like it, right? So we are in agreement about what we are going to do. So we both get the chance to make sure that nothing appears that is immoral, according to our moral principles, right? So I don't start to, okay, I can get that coconut. Yeah, he might want it, but I'll take it, right? I was here first. Or create some kind of rules, right, that bosses people around. So that it might not be like a walk in the park, but we have to start somewhere, right? It doesn't work as it's being done now by people being threatened into submission by somebody calling themselves government, right? So no. Me and my fellow citizens, so to say, we cannot go and threaten each other into submission or applying moral principles and come to agreements. No, we have to have this big, violent monstrosity of a government pointing guns at all of us to say, you just do as we say and everything will be okay, right? And if you don't like it, you can try and work against it, but we will probably shoot you, right? Do I need to say anymore, right? So, ethics is about making sure that you don't violate a moral principle. And that moral principle is basically your principle. Because you will need to have a principle in order to engage with somebody else, right? You don't have to have the same principle. You can have different principles with some common ground, right? Maybe the first 4 or 5 axioms within your metaphysics or whatever, they align with each other, and then you can agree, right? But the rest you cannot agree upon, then you have to avoid inflicting yourself on each other, because one of you at least will find that immoral, right? So if you want to apply that particular aspect, you have to go somewhere else and talk to somebody else who you agree with, and then you can inflict it. If you want to eat somebody else, well, it's not likely that you are easily going to find somebody, but you might be lucky, right? There was this case in Germany where somebody agreed to being eaten, or they started eating his, his penis or whatever it was. I don't remember. Rammstein made a video, a song about it, Mind Tile, right? That if you can come to an agreement, who am I to tell you what to do, right? I'm not going to tell you what to do. I can't boss you around. I can't say, hey, I have a feeling that is immoral. You can't do that. It should be illegal. There should be a law against. Right? That's none of your fucking business. You can't boss people around, right? Like you're some kind of moral magical creature that has this trolley problem, godlike intervention that knows everything and can boss people around. You should pull the lever over there, and there's only you figure out how to pull the lever because it's going to be bad or worse. So you choose, right? But you have confined it into a scenario where you don't really, as a divine intervention, don't really care about the outcome, because it's not about the outcome. It's about putting people in a situation that they can't get out of because they are not sufficiently qualified or have done the sufficient thinking to be able to say whether or not this is at all something that you can deal with morally or ethically or whatever, right? So that they hand over the power to those who actually want to have moral power over you. Because at the deepest level of all this, it is the idea that if you have morality on your side, you get to boss people around, right? That notion, that promise, so to say, is what get a lot of people off, right? They are morally justified for some weird reason to boss somebody else around, right? That's not a good idea, I think, right? I'm quite convinced that morality is about finding some excuse for how you get to boss people around and tell, hey, things should be put together like this or that way, or if I got it my way, I will save the world, right? It's all about getting to boss people around. Well, you don't get to do that, right? Stop bossing people around. Right? And there's also another thing which is even worse. If you cannot tell me what your moral principle is, right? Maybe somehow you argue towards a moral principle that basically gives you the right to boss people around. I guess I can't rule that out. But then please illuminate me on the philosophy and the ethics behind that, magical moral principle, right? How do you get to that? How do you get to that last step and now I can boss you around? How do you get to do that, right? Because if you can boss somebody else around, I don't see any reason why I can't boss you around. And then I can tell you, shut the fuck up. Sit down and eat your pants, right? Put a sock in it, right? And then you say, oh yeah, but I've done the thinking. I have 3 PhDs in philosophy, so I have the papers. I get to boss people around because an authority told me I'm in my right to do so because I'm a moral philosopher, Fuck off, right? Nobody gets to boss anybody about, right? In that scenario I talked about in an agreement, right? If you have an agreement and you expect the other part in that agreement, or the other parts, if there are more than one, right, that they don't live up to their agreement, maybe then you get to boss them around or say, you agreed to, it says here in our agreement, you promised to do this particular action, place this, these 15 carats ought to be at that place, at that time, in that quality, according to our agreement. You didn't live up to our agreement, right? then you might be able to say, okay, now I get to boss you around because you're not living up to your agreement, right? But unless there is an agreement, you don't get to boss anybody around, right? Oh, but you see the social contract. Yes, you are born into slavery, and it's called a social contract. There was a famous philosopher in 17 something who said the magical word social contract. So therefore, everybody has to be born into this very nice social contract where they don't need to agree upon the agreement, right? They're just born into the agreement, and the other part is going to boss them around all the rest of their life, right? I don't buy any of that either. Right? Nobody gets to boss you around unless you have an agreement to do so, right? And who the hell wanted somebody to boss them around, right? If that's the part of the agreement, boss me around, right? Okay, fair enough. Then do it your way, right? I, for one, am not buying it. And I think it's a good standard, right? Because it also pushes back that you cannot let some third party be a moral agent for you. You have to participate in establishing and keeping things moral. Right? You can't just say, I paid my taxes, so now government take care of morality. I can just go and do, and they will say, okay, is it legal or is it illegal? Well, if it's not illegal, it must be legal, so I can do it, right? I can just get an abortion or a divorce or get whatever, right? And I'll do this, that, and the other. All these moral hazards because of a system that doesn't work in the first place, because you cannot get to boss people around without their consent, right? You cannot be born into consent in some kind of social contract. It's fucking ridiculous, right? So, no matter what you're experiencing, thinking, feeling, or philosophizing, none of that all of a sudden gives you the right to boss me around, right? That's it. Please share, like, subscribe, consider donation. Links below. Otherwise, see you in the next one.